This is the NoMAD panel. We are very excited to have NoMAD in the Jamf family, and we've got a slew of people up here that are ready to answer questions, and they've got a few things to talk about. I'm going to introduce Vasu from Druva.
Okay. Can you guys hear me at the back? Okay, wonderful. So welcome. I'm glad that you had an awesome afternoon, and you're having an awesome afternoon, and the sessions so far have been spectacular, at least by my standards, when I look at all the presentations that have gone on in the morning. But to keep up the tempo, let's make sure that we ask the right questions and address the audience, because that's always a touch and go sometimes. So anyway, first introduction, Joel Rennick from NoMAD. So Joel, take it from there. Well,
thank you, Vasu. So greetings, welcome. We've got a kind of a cross-section of people using NoMAD open source, NoMAD with Octa, NoMAD with Octa, some with the password synchronization, starting with the login window a little bit. So we thought we'd give them each a couple of minutes to kind of tell you about their environments, the journey, as I think that's a good word for it, that they're going on as they move away from binding to much better things. And then, so that'll take us about 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for questions. If there are no questions, I will continue to throw bottle openers and really large T-shirts. We've run out of the smaller sizes until we get questions. So with that, without further ado, we're going to go from right to left, and so we're going to start with Ed. Oh, and there's Josh. Sorry. Yeah. Josh, well, his picture's not on there. So Josh, our former head of engineering, now principal engineer at Jamf. A lot of the code is his. All the bad code is his.
Yeah, you can try that.
That's not true, Joel. I got a bone to pick with you later today.
Yeah. We can look at that blame log.
And with that, before Josh has a chance to answer, because that might be awkward for me, we'll continue on with Ed.
Yeah. So I'm Ed Chirac. I'm an engineer at Cardinal Health. Some of you may know who that is. We're a company up in Columbus, Ohio, just outside of Columbus and Dublin. We do some healthcare stuff. We've got about 500 Macs right now. We just opened up our choice program, so we expect that to grow pretty considerably over the next couple of years. We haven't bound our Macs since, what, NoMAD 0.9. So it's been a couple years at least. So we've been kind of working with NoMAD for a long time. We've had it in our production environment since 1.0. So we've certainly used a lot of its features as well as NoMAD Login. So and just for the record, if you guys actually do hit a race condition in NoMAD, it's definitely Joel's code.
Ouch. This is already going poorly. And a couple of things. Your environment is a little bit unique in that you're unable to necessarily join the Jamf server to AD, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So some of you may be familiar with this, but essentially, with your Jamf server, right, you want to have part of that Jamf server be public-facing so that when your devices are off your network, they still are managed, they still get policies, they still get configuration profiles. And we had this concern when we initially went through our architecture review board where if it touches the outside, it can't touch Active Directory. Like, period, hard stop. Doesn't matter what kind of proxy you put in front of it, doesn't matter what kind of sort of, two-factor authentication you want to put in front of it. Our security team just isn't comfortable with that posture. So we had to come up with some really creative ways to still be able to scope things like licensed software, that we already have security groups for in the Windows space with SCCM, where they can just auto-install a piece of software based on adding a security group. We can go into it a little bit more, but NoMAD gives us the ability to do that. NoMAD is aware of the groups that you have for all of those, for that user. And you can use an extension attribute to query that. And then you can scope your groups with a like attribute. And it'll then go through, not necessarily in real time, right? Because that extension attribute's only going to update when you recon. Turns out you can do it with the API and a launch daemon item that runs, say, every 15 minutes as well, if you're really concerned about it. So there's a lot of ways to do that. I did a great talk about it at Penn State Mac Admins. Unfortunately, the audio didn't come through, so it didn't get uploaded. That was really a shame.
You could dub it.
That's what I recommend. That's what he said. If you guys have more, kind of questions about that, I encourage you to ask here, and I'm at all the happy hours, and Joel will tell you I love to talk, so I'm happy to talk to any of you about it. But it's a fun topic and something that was an interesting challenge.
Because you were otherwise looking at Active Directory application mode, Adam.
Yeah,
right?
we did. Yeah, well, we still use that a little bit for some other applications because we actually really liked that pattern. But one of the things that we looked at was there's a part of Windows Server that some of you may know called Active Directory Lightweight Directory Services. Lightweight Directory Services allows you to build essentially like an application level directory. And you can use something that Microsoft calls Atom Sync. And it's sort of a challenging product. There isn't a huge amount of documentation around it. A lot of the really good documentation comes from two TechNet blog articles from 2013. And essentially, you sort of wade through this, and you put together this really weird XML config file. But you can sync over specific OUs and specific attribute items from those OUs. And there's a whole bunch of minutia with, like, you have to sort of sync up the schema between ADLDS and your Active Directory because they will not be the same. And if you try to sync in and you don't have all the schema there, then it's going to crash and it's not going to sync and weird things will happen. But it's a neat thing that you can do. The nice thing about it is it's a one-way read-only sync. And then you can create an account inside this LDS for your Jamf instance that doesn't exist in your backend Active Directory. So that means if the worst thing happens and somebody gets past your proxy and they break into your Jamf server and they discover the credentials that you're using to authenticate against your LDS instance, and then they start doing attacks on it, like trying to lock out all of your accounts, trying to enumerate the directory, any number of other things like that, it's not really successful. They can't enumerate an entire directory because it's not there. And then they can't traverse back because that account only exists in your LDS instance, not back in your full-scale Active Directory. So they think they've sort of gotten these great credentials and they can go back and they can do all these things, but really they've got nothing. So it's an interesting thing from a security perspective. I don't want to take up all the time, though.
Oh, good. Thank you. All right. Moving on.
I feel like crewman number 6 from Galaxy Quest. I can't believe they let us up here.
You're not wearing a red shirt, so I think you're safe.
Awesome. So my name's David Stoichescu. I am the head of IT and other things for a cybersecurity company called Expel in Northern Virginia. I have a luxury that a lot of people here kind of do not have, which is, I've been using the Jamf product since about 2012, and I had it deployed in a kind of very large environment, and I had an opportunity to start at Expel super early on for a cybersecurity company and kind of build everything from the ground up. Just kind of the way I wanted to. So I kind of had no limitations. And what I wanted to do from the very beginning is not do what I did before, which was kind of think almost in a selfish way when it comes to how we take care of our employees. And I say that in kind of like the most kind of candid way I can, which is earlier in my career, I definitely, when I ran kind of service desk operations, I was a help desk guy, and that's kind of how I got up through the ranks. I was just kind of about closing out tickets, right? And kind of getting rid of users as quick as possible. And as I matured through my career, I realized that, we're here to provide a service to our employees. And, end user experience isn't just a role in somewhere else in the organization. It's something that we're responsible for, right? We want to enable our employees to do their job as quickly as possible and have as little friction as possible when it comes to interacting with the technology team. So when I started kind of building out the infrastructure, I said, I was talking to our COO at the time. When he brought me on board, he said, there's 2 things that I want. I want cloud, everything, and I want no Active Directory. Now, a little bit of backstory on the no Active Directory. We're in the security space, and we have, our organization has a lot of experience from a kind of cyber response perspective. And the majority of breaches kind of happen via Active Directory. Somebody gets a hold of your credentials, they get in your environment, and they can move laterally. And I think everybody who builds an Active Directory environment has really great intentions. It's going to be secure. Maybe we're going to bring somebody in, and they're going to build it, and it's going to be awesome, and they're going to put all the documentation together, and it's just going to be great. And then what happens is the organization grows, and you end up hiring a bunch of sysadmins, a lot of procedures. Then things like configuration drifts start coming into play. The next thing you know, it's becoming very, very difficult, if not impossible, to have a very secure Active Directory environment. Now, I'm not saying that they're not out there, but I'm saying it's difficult to do. And from what we've seen, we decided not to do that. And that's kind of where I started to think creatively on how I'm going to deploy a scalable IT infrastructure that's going to be very low friction for our staff, provide a very good level of security, and also make it simple for our employees to do what they need to do. And so the short story is, I kind of stumbled into doing a lot of research, and I kind of stumbled into NoMAD, and it was a perfect fit for us. We use Octa as our identity provider, and it's tied into almost every application that we use, and via the NoMAD Login product, we now have a seamless login experience. You use your Octa credentials to log into your macOS machine. We actually have a very similar experience on the Windows side. We're actually using a thing called Autopilot, but we'll save that for the Windows side of things. But it's been awesome. The feedback has been great from using the application, and it's just cool to kind of get feedback from our employees about having such a super positive experience when it comes to interacting with IT. Like from a culture perspective, IT is kind of one of the three things that I think is what makes up culture besides pay and the company kind of top-down culture from your executive team. An employee is going to interact a lot with IT and HR. And it's my job to make sure that that interaction is super, super positive. So when I engineer stuff, I have to put myself in the employee's shoes.
Sure.
And just for a little bit of insight, throughout my career, I have never, except once, been in a role where I wasn't in some sort of operational IT role, like either on the help desk or in management on the IT side. And it wasn't until the job before this one where I was a NOC manager, and I was a customer of IT at the organization where I worked at, and I got a taste for what it was like to not have the tools that I need. And that really inspired me to go the direction that I did when it comes to kind of creating a super seamless EUX for our employees.
Cool. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Kane, who's got an even more unique perspective on some of this.
Yeah, well, my name's Kane, and I work for Octa. So this was kind of a no-brainer, right? NoMAD, Login plus Octa, developed for the Octa API. We're Octa. Let's marry the two together. So Octa's an interesting company. We're enterprise identity management, and we're also in the security cloud space. We definitely look at things from a very low-level security standpoint. We want to make sure that we dot all our I's and lowercase j's and cross our T's while we're at it. So putting NoMAD in, we had to go through a lot of security vetting, and Joel, when he came on site, he wowed our security team. They loved it. They loved the product. They loved his attention to detail. And so from a security perspective, NoMAD passed muster with Octa with flying colors. So great job there to Joel and team for that.
Thank you.
So we have an interesting infrastructure at Octa. I can't talk too much about it, but I'll tell you one little thing is we don't have any servers on-prem. We are 100% cloud all the time. Our logo, our mantra is always on, and because we're in the cloud. The few anecdotal servers we do have are things like NetBoot, NetSUS, that sort of thing, just for IT support. So internal infrastructure is routers, switches, and a connection to the internet. So it made a lot of sense for us to use NoMAD. And any of you who may have attended Octane last year, or actually this year, excuse me, probably heard my colleague Mick Johnson talking about our unified login. And that initiative makes use of NoMAD, NoMAD Login plus Octa. And so we've been working very closely with Joel and Josh to iron out the wrinkles and work out the kinks. We're providing feedback to them to make the product better for the Octa login experience. And we have gone through testing with both the File Vault login moving into NoMAD login plus Octa to desktop to NoMAD Pro login, which seems like a lot of logins, to just doing the File Vault login straight to desktop as Apple intended, but allowing NoMAD login to be available when a user logs out. And then, of course, we have NoMAD Pro synchronizing passwords and giving password notifications and that sort of thing. So it might sound like we've disabled 90% of NoMAD's functionality, and we have, much to Joel's chagrin, but it works for us. And we still have some, some hills to overcome, but we're getting there. And so far, user testing has been very positive in the IT and the beta test teams. We're now deploying NoMAD Login plus Octa and NoMAD Pro to our new hires. And so far, it's helping us do just-in-time provisioning of user accounts that are federated with Octa's universal directory. So we don't have to worry about creating a user account at deploy time. So that's reduced our deployment footprint from about 20 to 30 minutes down to, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes or less on the Mac side of the house. And my team is now actively deploying Macs in a box to users as of this week. And they're walking the users in new hire orientation through the Octa portion, getting the Octa user registration to take place. And we've had some hurdles there. Instead of using email invitations, we are now managing the the username and passwords up front, and reworking that a little bit. But so far, it's looking very good and very positive. And we hope to make it even smoother with Jamf 10.9 and marry that together. And just to briefly talk about Joel's other product, DEP Notify, we're using that as a post-Jamf enrollment process to deploy our apps internally. And that takes over the desktop and deploys everything, and then it kicks them back out to the NoMAD login screen. We're not using the built-in version of DEP Notify that's built into NoMAD login, just because it's not feature-rich enough at this time, and it doesn't provide us the ability to do certain things at certain points in the process. But hopefully in the future, when the product becomes more mature, that will be embedded and we can make use of that. So I think that pretty much covers us right now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much to the three of you. What I'd like to do now is we've got a lot of people in the audience kind of happy to take questions, play Stump the Chump up here. And that wasn't me. That was one of the others. But so if we got a couple of mics, and between the three of the panelists and then Josh and myself, if we can't solve it, we'll write code and we'll go from there. All right, first question.
All right, how you guys doing? I'm giving a presentation on DEP Notify later this week,
John.
So come by if anybody wants to.
Did you really just come up to plug your own session?
No. Came up to stump you. Is there any expected release date for the complete feature-rich DEP Notify in NoMAD Login?
So in the open source NoMAD Login AD repo, there's a Mac sysadmin 2018 branch, which has everything. If you go back to, not to pitch another conference here, but a Mac sysadmin, I did a long presentation on all the different things that you could do at the login window piece. So that code is already out there. It's in a branch in the NoMAD Login AD repo. All of that has been incorporated into what will be a forthcoming version of NoMAD Plus Login, which will now be Jamf Connect Login. The names maybe are getting a little better. I don't know about that. So yeah, that's all in there, and I encourage you to take a look at that and to see. There are some things, like Kane mentioned, that we couldn't easily replicate at the login window, some of the user interaction and stuff like that with DEP Notify, although we've now added some new screens to the login process. So that may account for some of that.
Cool. Thanks for not messing my presentation up.
Yeah, I was going to actually just dovetail on that really quick too. The DEP notify that's built in the NoMAD login. If you're deploying NoMAD login when Jamf enrolls itself right after DEP, that's great, but that doesn't account for your older non-DEP Macs, which is where the standalone version comes into play. And this was one of the problems we have because we adopted DEP fairly late in the game at Octa within the past year. And so we retroactively applied all of our Macs to the DEP program. So everything 2015 and forward is DEP, but anything prior, which is typically loaners or test machines or whatever, are non-DEP. And we use those for trade shows and they're burner laptops, things that we can turn and burn pretty quickly and not worry about. And, the problem is, how do you get the same workflow to present itself? And so by using the standalone DEP notify, we were actually able to allow the DEP process to kick off the Jamf enrollment, which allows the user to log in, and then DEP notify comes up, it installs the NoMAD components, because at this point it does a quick little command line check. Are you DEP or not? It says no. It says, oh, I know what to do now. So now I have one workflow to rule them all, and it's pretty clever.
Yeah,
We actually took a same approach.
Yeah.
Actually, with standalone DEP notify. As a matter of fact, I can probably second on a lot of the infrastructure and things that you've built. We've pretty much done the same thing. So that's worked out pretty well.
Cool.
And for those of you that don't quite know, when we're running with Notify in the login window, like Joel said, there are some limitations around user interaction, things like that. It's because NoMAD Login and Jamf Connect Login are not standalone applications, right? They're plugins to the Apple security infrastructure. So they're actually running inside those very non-privileged kind of contexts. So it prevents us from doing everything right away that was easily done at the standalone and providing that same experience all the way through.
Cool. Another question.
Yeah, so we use SSO at our institution, and ideally users would change it while logged into their own computer through the SSO pop-up. But if users acted ideally, I probably wouldn't have a job. So if they change their password through the SSO on another device, how does NoMAD handle that? Is it just a nice, friendly pop-up?
So there is a setting that you can change in the NoMAD config. I don't remember, do you remember the key name? I don't remember the exact key name for this. I'd have to look it up in the documentation.
Unannounced password
Unannounced
changes?
password
Yeah,
change.
it's like yeah. So essentially, you can flip this flag on or off. So I think the default is it's off. And then basically what happens is if you change your password somewhere else, NoMAD doesn't necessarily immediately know about it, but it's gonna, essentially you're gonna get logged out, and then when the user logs back in, depending on how you have it configured, you can sync the local password, which is another key. For what you're talking about, you'd want to toggle that key to on, and every so often NoMAD will poll to see if the password that it has is the same as your remote password, and if it's not, and now you can customize this message, but it will pop up a message in Notification Center letting you know essentially that your remote password and your local password are now different. The password's changed underneath you. And so it will then give you the ability to update that password, and then if you have the appropriate key set in the profile, it will also update your keychain, your login, and your file vault passwords as well. But again, those are just two different preference keys in there. So you can configure that behavior however you want. We actually have that behavior turned off in my environment for a number of reasons.
And you may have mentioned it, but can you change the interval of how often it's checked?
No.
No.
What is
so
that?
it's
It
probably
checks every 15 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
When we were looking at these things, we checked with Microsoft and Microsoft's rules for doing your domain evaluation for sites and services and location is they say do it every 15 minutes or so. So we use Apple's background scheduler, and we just say every 15 minutes or so, do this thing, and it'll check then. So it's roughly the same schedule as the Windows machines.
Does it evaluate if you click on it too, though?
Yes.
Yeah. Also, on any network change, if
Yeah.
you
Log in, log out.
log in, log out, things
Yeah.
like that, it'll also evaluate then.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of hooks for when it does it. So I think when you click on it, it checks to see if your Kerberos ticket's valid. If it's not, it'll renew it. And so as part of that process, obviously, it would get any kind of password changes or anything like that would pick up at that time.
Thank you.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
perfect. Thank you.
Excellent.
Next question. I guess we're all taking them up here at mic number 2, just as a note.
So this is my third JNUC. I NoMAD as far as my knowledge of it. I remember hearing about it last year at JNUC a little bit. My question is related to Enterprise Connect, right? Like why NoMAD over Enterprise Connect? When I go back to my company and we're already using it, why NoMAD?
Because NoMAD's better.
Because of
ARBs love that answer.
So do you use Octa in your environment?
We do not currently.
Okay.
No.
Well, he was going to go for the easy one.
Well, I was. Well, there are other compelling reasons, but
fair enough. I'll let you go, and then I can.
Well, no, I mean I went last time. You can go.
All right.
Yeah.
So a couple of things that we look at. We wanted to make NoMAD horrendously configurable. So any single menu item you can turn on or turn off using a configuration profile. Any of the text that you can see, you should be able to change using a configuration profile. We can do things like the unannounced password change. That's not something that Enterprise Connect has. So there's a lot of little bits and features in there that we added in because we wanted to make it much more of an administrator tool rather than just here's a password change, let's go do that. Now, having said that, the folks behind Enterprise Connect, great people. It's a good product. I think we do a little bit more. And the entry price into NoMAD for the AD side is 0. So that makes it really easy, right?
Yeah, ARBs do love that answer.
Yeah. And you
now
can try
that
it.
Jamf support will take your questions. Hopefully that helps get rid of maybe some little open source stigma and some of the other things that are around there.
And the other thing too is you can get a lot more information out of Jamf. So like I touched on a little bit earlier, I mean you can get security group information, which sometimes it's nice if you want to run a script and make a decision on the endpoint, but you don't want to pull back Jamf.
Sure.
So we have some naming conventions which rely on some of our Active Directory attributes that Jamf's aware of, or that NoMAD's aware of. And so rather than having to say write a script that's API aware and have it pull down the API and store all that information, we can just query the NoMAD plist for it because we always know where that's going to be, right? It's always going to be in the user library. It's always there, and that information is updated anytime NoMAD updates, which, as we just talked about, is a lot. So you can be pretty sure that it's accurate. So there's a lot of things that we ended up using it for internally, and when we looked at Enterprise Connect, as much as it's a great product, we just found that we didn't have the same extensibility to add on to it and to build other features off of it that we had with NoMAD.
Solid. Okay.
Good answer.
Well done.
Thank you.
Well done. Next question.
My question is not really a technical question, but I'm curious, I guess Jamf Connect has a cost evaluation. I work in higher ed. Is there going to be any higher ed costs to reduce that down?
Now that Josh and I don't do everything for the program, I don't know. But I would ask
besides using NoMAD.
So,
like if you want
NoMAD
support.
by itself, if you're just using AD, NoMAD and NoMAD Login will all be free, open source, same as they were before. So unless you want to have an actual support contract for that, which Jamf will sell you, you may not need anything else other than that. It's only when you move up to the cloud identity with something like Octa or some of the other cloud identities that are out there, that's where Jamf Connect comes into play. Does that make sense?
Yeah, which is, and at that rate, that's where we also had started to charge per seat and things like that as well. With Jamf Connect, because everything is bundled now, you get more for less, essentially, than if you had bought the pieces individually from Orchard and Grove before as well.
Okay, thank you.
Hi guys, I work in higher ed as well. I absolutely love the product. It's enormously simplified our lab environments. Students just rock up, click the login button, no password required, and then they're prompted to log in with NoMAD. That's fantastic. I'm not quite there yet with the staff deployment side of things though. We're still binding to Active Directory even though NoMAD is on there. Primarily because a number of our staff rely on services like SSH logins to their devices from other people's user contexts, which are based around Active Directory permissions and groups. I want to be able to add a group of particular academics to, say, SSH or file share logins directly on a client Mac, and they can do that themselves. I haven't been able to get that working properly with NoMAD yet. Is Jamf Connect going to use any functionality around that, or is that kind of granular access just...
Well, what you're looking at, and I'll replay this back a little bit and correct me where I go wrong, is you want people that don't have local accounts on the machine to be able to connect in at some point.
Using their Active Directory credentials, yeah.
The direction that we've taken is not for you. So go ahead, keep using NoMAD on the bound machine. You're perfectly fine, that's great. I don't know that we're ever, nor that I know that we would want to completely replicate that directory service structure, right? Because that's where a lot of the idiosyncrasies of the AD plugin start to kick in, right? Because you've always got to have that connection going back to AD on whatever chance that somebody's going to SSH in or do something else like that. And so if you do have machines that are more multi-user than that, then staying bound is a perfectly legitimate, we'll give you the official blessing that you're not crazy for doing that, and you have a good reason. Because I don't know that we're ever going to replicate this.
Yeah, I'm not sure how you would, to tell you the truth. But
we've been doing things to allow new users to log in at the login window so that if you're IT, you can get on the machine, go to the login window, and be able to sign in. But we're not probably ever going to handle anything that would be on the Kerberos side with SSH or something like that.
One thing you said, though, does lead me to my second sneaky question. Did you ever consider making a directory access plugin instead of...
We did. We ran away screaming.
Ah, okay.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
we looked at that. There are some of the problems that you run into with the AD plugin aren't necessarily the code in the AD plugin. It's more the directory services infrastructure underneath in general in regards to things like the pinwheels and timeouts and all that. The AD plugin is written on top of the OD APIs. And while we can use those same APIs, you end up then with some of the same problems that you do when just cutting around it like we did.
Well, don't mess with success. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say, this year, you're obviously very popular. I was at your session last year, and I believe it was on the 3rd or 4th floor,
it was
a little bit smaller. So obviously, the announcement of the acquisition's been obviously good for the attention. I just want to say congrats on that. That must feel awesome. Went through a company that went through an acquisition recently. For the founders, it was pretty cool. I just had some basic questions.
I see what you did there.
We're still working.
I just had some basic questions. I've been looking into what NoMAD is for the last year. With all the new attendees here, I kind of wanted to ask something that maybe someone who's new to the session might not know. Vaguely, what is, and this is so you don't have to answer an incredibly long question, what is the process that NoMAD and NoMAD Login do separately? And what's the biggest difference between the open source versions and Jamf Connect?
Sure. Yeah. So in general, rule of thumb, real easy. If it's AD, LDAP, or just Kerberos, it's open source. So that's staying there. That's in NoMAD. That's what we had open source before, and that stays open source. Anything that deals with a cloud identity, that's where it will be part of the Jamf Connect. And then smart cards as well. Anybody using smart cards? Well, a few.
Couple
But you didn't come to this session for smart card talk, right? Good, all right. And then smart cards. So that's part of the Jamf Connect suite. And we're going to put everything into there. It's one suite. You get all the pieces whether you need it or not. And then all the advancements, what we did this morning, which will also work with Octa, will all be in there as well.
Cool. So then separately, because right now you still have the open sources, what's the difference between NoMAD and NoMAD Login? So they're two separate items, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So NoMAD essentially allows you to get a lot of the benefits of binding a Mac to Active Directory. So in this case, the password synchronization and Kerberizing the device, right? So allowing you, single sign-on type access to Active Directory resources that are Kerberos aware. NoMAD Login allows you to log into a Mac with your Active Directory credentials, even if that account doesn't currently exist on the machine. It's going to reach out to Active Directory, validate those credentials, and then it's going to create an account on the machine, an actual local account for that user, and so you can log in on the fly, very similar to what happens on a Windows machine. You log in, your credentials are authenticated, the account structure is created, and then you log in. So they are a little bit separate. NoMAD Login does not Kerberize the Mac, and it doesn't, well, it will set the password initially, but it's not going to continue to sync it going forward. As far as I know, that's the NoMAD piece. Somebody correct me if I'm off base
Well
there.
done.
All right.
And that'll kind of segue into the new one, Jamf Connect, which was previously the pro versions of the aforementioned. We don't use Octa in our environment. And currently,
You should try
I
it.
mean, Octa is good. We're an Octa shop too.
we're
so.
a little too far developed into Azure right now.
Okay.
And that's where it's going to
Well,
go.
that's coming though, right?
Yeah, and when do you expect that Jamf Connect will have, in a rough sense, you know, in a quarter or a year, when you'll have the rough release and support
We would
for
expect-
Azure?
Is this being recorded? We're still the new guys, so we can say a lot of things.
Yeah, we don't know the better
What you
yet.
saw in the keynote today, the login piece was very solid. And so we expect to have that within the next couple of weeks, I would expect. And then what we're doing with the system preferences, where we want that to be with any SAML provider, that may be a little bit later, but it'll still be part of the suite.
Like 5 or 6 weeks.
A couple weeks, yeah.
Yeah. So it's coming. That's the.
It is coming. Yeah.
Is it what you're saying?
You know, Christmas is a good time.
But before the end of the year, we'll see something.
Yeah, what I'd like to have is a little bit of a beta process, because we know certainly what we found.
Is there a current process to getting involved in that beta?
No.
Okay.
But there will be. Talk to your rep. Let your rep know.
Awesome. And then one last question. This is more of a public statement of Joel. I have known you, and I think I've heard publicly is that you've been known for being an absolute superhero to your customers, doing everything from building a lot of the product and helping set up preference config files. Hopefully, you obviously expect this to scale, because the room's 3 times the size now, and you obviously aren't 3 people. Do you plan to have that scale, and will those little mini scaled people within Jamf, the Jamf support agents, be mini Joels?
That's a great question.
It's a great
Can we
question.
expect the same support?
So, over beers, we can talk about small companies who maybe do too much.
Yes. we do
Josh
it a
will
lot.
back up every single statement.
Yeah.
I mean, it was really great, but we got into the problem sometimes of we'd be on the phone with a customer, we'd be like, oh, I can just write that here, here's a new build. And you won't get that from Jamf. But I hope that we get some of that flavor and a lot of that into it. The other thing that I hope that we also get at, this is the great, with the acquisition, is you've already kind of seen some of it. He blamed it on IBM, but I think it was more us with the await configuration part in the pre-stage enrollment. You better believe that even though everything with NoMAD and Jamf Connect is MDM agnostic, our intent is to have as much of the configuration and UI directly into Jamf as possible. And that way, you won't need an army of me writing out configuration profiles that you can then install. You'll be able to click 3 buttons with an in-app guided access and training and all that amazing stuff that should hopefully solve that in a much better way for everyone involved. So the goal is, since we now have this really unified stack of a client piece and an MDM piece, that we can make that much more productive for you as the admin, as opposed then to having to do some of this. So will the support agents are amazing, and they'll be amazing. Is their level of knowledge of the code as deep as Josh or myself? Absolutely not. And so there will be some difference there. However, having said that, we hope to make it much easier just to do the whole thing, whether you're on NoMAD or Jamf Connect, and that way you won't have to worry about it anyway.
Awesome. And
Make
I
sense?
apologize. Yes, and I apologize. I did have one more quick question.
Uh-oh.
I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Do you have a EOL on the open source? Like, is it going to, as far as I aware, it's 1.2, 1.3? Is it going to? Okay. Cool.
All the same.
All the
I'm
same.
surprised more people didn't fork it, but if you don't believe me, fork the repos. But no, we intend none of that changes.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Now sit down. All right, next question.
So I keep forgetting to ask you guys this question, but I have an issue that I noticed and happened today is that a user signs in to a shared workstation with NoMAD Login Plus, walk away, computer falls asleep, nobody else can use it. Can I just turn on fast user switching? Will that work with NoMAD Login Plus?
Nobody else can use it because you're at the login?
Because it's at the login window for that user that was signed in.
Oh, because you've still got to go through the screensaver before you get to the login.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So can I turn on fast user switching?
You can enable an admin group to go through the screensaver?
Yeah, because you can't enable an admin to go through the screensaver.
Yeah.
Because we don't mess with the screensaver because of fast user switching and Apple's biometrics and stuff like that they have.
But I could turn fast user switching on and it would take them back to the
Yes, because then you'd see the login
But you can
window.
also set up, unless it's changed in later versions of macOS, you should be able to set a group for the screensaver rules that allow an administrator, any administrator user, to be able to unlock that screen and log that session out.
But if you have fast user switching, you should see a login window or
yeah,
another
you can just
user
switch
button.
back to the login window.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you could log in with a different user.
Yeah. I hadn't tried it yet. I just told the user I unplugged the computer and it worked. So.
or that. You just turn it off and turn it on again.
Super easy. All right, thanks.
Thanks. So just coming back to the other gentleman's question, he was basically asking about Enterprise Connect versus NoMAD, and then I guess Edward had first said, "Are you an Octa shop?" So we're trying to we're starting to scale with Octa, and we're kind of implementing it more and more. And I just kind of, what can I take back to my bosses and the higher ups and say, we need to get on NoMAD and we need to get on Jamf Connect for these reasons with Octa. Just curious.
You wore the shirt.
I feel like that's a pretty that's probably a big answer.
Yeah, that's a very big answer. Take the time to test it and make sure all the implementations are working properly the way you want them to. There's a few different points of ingress and egress with the way NoMAD Login plus Octa works. So if you're or if your user group your environment is used to having, log in through the File Vault login window and take you straight to desktop, and you have NoMAD Login plus Octa injected in there, then they're going to get a secondary login, which is now going to prompt them for an Octa username and password with MFA. And so that's going to be a point of contention for some people. They're going to think, why am I logging in twice? Then they're going to get the desktop. And if you're running NoMAD Pro and it's prompting you for Octa username and password, your users might think, well, wait a minute, I already logged in at the login window. Don't I have a session? So if your user base is not familiar with how Octa sessions work and how Octa tokens work, we're not passing a token from the login window to the desktop to NoMAD Pro. And NoMAD Pro doesn't pass that token around to different applications. So you use NoMAD Pro to log into Octa, it opens up your favorite browser, and there you are. But if you go over to your Salesforce app or your RingCentral app or whatever apps you got that are Octa, behind the Octa MFA, NoMAD's not going to take any control or ownership of that. And so your user are going to think, well, wait a minute, what good is this? So you have to kind of do a little bit of education on your user base and inform them that this is more about password synchronization. This is about password expiration notification. 15 days, 14 days countdown time. It also allows you to do that just-in-time provisioning of the user account at deployment time of the Mac. Whether you're handing that Mac off with the post-it note, step 1, turn on, step 2, whatever, there is no step 3, or if you're actually having your IT shop take it from end-to-end provisioning. Either way, you still have to know how NoMAD works. So if you go that route, you have to think about what your culture is like. And it really boils down to culture at the end of the day. And if your culture doesn't like that, then you can turn off the NoMAD login on boot time, but then the users will still see NoMAD login when they log out. If you are in the realm of people who have a kiosk mode with multiple user accounts, then you have to use the migration feature, and Josh and Joel have some ideas on how to get around some of those things. And we're looking at that as well for some of our devices. We haven't gotten there yet, but we're still brainstorming on it. So there may be some new features that come in the future, who knows.
The short answer, we work with Octa.
Yeah.
So yeah, and as Kane said, it's what we're doing, it's maybe not bleeding edge, but we're certainly doing things that haven't necessarily been done before as we go through this. And as Kane mentioned, we can do a login all the time. And if you come to us and you said, well, I want MFA every time I log in, great. Your users will probably hate you.
Yeah, no one wants to actually have to use MFA on every authentication. It will make you crazy.
It's not good. Don't do that.
Plus, the whole idea behind Octa is one password to rule them all. You log in once, you don't think about a password ever again until your session time's out. And not to throw Joel and Josh under the bus, but NoMAD defeats that purpose if you have that feature enabled.
So quick time check. We have time for 3 more questions. We're going to run just a little bit over. If you guys want to stick around, that would be great. And go ahead and ask your question.
Hey there. This year, our district jumped headfirst into Jamf and NoMAD Login, put out 300 teacher devices, custom login screen with the login. Everything's great. Everyone's logging in great. But on the way here, I got a couple of calls. The first couple of people who have upgraded to Mojave, the Jamf login goes away. Is that expected?
You just need to use the auth changer command again.
Okay.
And you add it back in.
Yeah,
Got it.
Apple reset the database on the major OS update.
Yep. Which, and you'll find with a lot of things, Apple resets stuff during those major.
Okay.
Yeah.
We use the same version of NoMAD login and keep on going?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's a feature.
Yeah, that's just an important point. You'll see this if you use any kind of configuration management tool like Puppet or something like that to make changes to those machines, and you do a major upgrade, and all of a sudden those changes just aren't there anymore. That's a normal Apple sort of
Test
thing.
before you let them upgrade.
Yeah, do that.
So I've finally been able to start playing around with NoMAD and NoMAD Login past couple of weeks, and haven't really dived in too deep, but one of the issues I saw with NoMAD Login was 802.1x integration and being able to easily get connected to the network to where you can make that AD call. Sure. Is that something that is...
It's something we're working on.
Okay.
Joel was showing off some Wi-Fi at the login window stuff. It's just a lot of moving pieces when we are on our own application to coordinate. So we're working on that. The plan is that we want to be able to support regular 802.1x for wired and Wi-Fi at the login window. It's not there quite yet, but we're getting there.
Well, we want to even do better. We want to give you a pull down where you can actually choose the network.
That would be awesome, yes.
Yeah, we're getting there.
Oh, yeah. Pick a wireless network, yeah.
Can we
next week, right?
Pick a cert for that network, too?
Can you what?
Can we get a second drop down to pick a cert for that network?
Well, yeah, that's all in the code already. We just need the UI.
Yeah.
Cool. So, definitely.
Thank you.
By the end of the year.
Hey guys.
Your words.
So with the upcoming integration with Microsoft Azure, is that going to be limited based on which kind of plan you have for Azure? Because I know that there are a couple of different premium tiers and basic.
Azure, and I couldn't tell you exactly which one it would work with.
Okay, cool.
Other than you'd need the single sign-on.
Right.
I know that's not the free one.
Right. Yeah, I think basic offers the single sign-on and up. So. Okay.
Yeah, but we'll have all that when we get it figured out.
As we get closer to that for testing and things like that, we'll let people know what versions of Azure or Azure AD or Azure AD for O365 or whatever it works with. So
cool, awesome.
We'll definitely know that as we get closer.
Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Last question.
I think we got one last question. So.
Hey, I just want to touch back on the OS update sort of reset hiccup thing. As Mac admins, I'm sure we're all used to that type of scenario. We just dealt with TCC. What is the proactive step you can take to avoid having to reach out and touch that device, or at least have it look like you've reached out and touched that device?
I don't know that you can. So.
Well, we're looking at some self-repair pieces that will constantly look at that database. So what's going on when you use NoMAD Login? We add an authentication mechanism within the list of the login window authentication mechanisms. And so it goes in a particular order, and that's where you can see our UI, we can hit AD and things like that. Apple, although in the early betas they weren't doing this, but then by the time they shipped 10.14 they were, tends to reset that database back to the stock setting. So one of the things we're looking at is our login window already comes with a tool called Auth Changer. And so that allows you to do a lot of configuration very easily. So it'd be very simple for us to just kind of look for this and change it as it goes through. The good news is, if your login window does get reset, you're really not anywhere bad. right? You still have the standard system authentication. The users that we've created through the login window process are still normal local users. And like what Kane's doing, we do have a very valid workflow that you use it for deployment, and then you go back to the Apple login window. If you're not interested so much in having any sort of IT user be able to sit down in front of a machine and create an account just in time through there, which may or may not be relevant based upon your workflows, then staying at the standard macOS login window is perfectly fine. And that way, you're not having to worry about it through updates. You're just using this through a DEP enrollment where you want to have MFA involved and things like that.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, the reason behind the reset was that Apple changed the order of the default mechs.
Yeah.
So rather than do like we do, which is carefully pick through and preserve and build and insert ours where they need to go, it's their OS, so they just blasted the thing.
Yeah, and I think there was a note somewhere, but Apple resets a lot of files as part of a major OS upgrade. And so, the shorter answer to your question is, unless Joel and these guys do something cute and creative within the software to self-repair itself, short of, building some kind of Jamf workflow, maybe with a launch daemon or something like that after the upgrade to sort of go through and maybe launch that, auth changer. I guess there's maybe some, you could get really creative with it, but
Don't give away all of our secrets.
Yeah.
We're getting the hook here. Thank you very much.
We gotta go.
We appreciate you coming out.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for being on stage.